I think most people in the society understand that the social contract is broken. I think that's something that you can see through loads of parts of the political spectrum, and especially amongst younger people as well, right? There is certainly a sense of intergenerational unfairness amongst younger people, and that's broadly seen throughout the media. I know the think tanks are cottoning onto this. The Centre for Policy Studies are talking about the social contract with regards to working young people paying tax, supporting migrants and people on benefits, which of course I think that their narrative about this is wrong, but they're clearly tapping into a sense of discontent with where the social contract is in this country. Robert Jenrick is a Tory who's trying to get on this action. And he released this quite weird video on social media earlier today talking about the social contract and in the context of people skipping the fare to take the tube. Let's watch.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back through the barrier and pay? Do you want to go back and pay like everybody else? Do you think it's all right not to pay? Why don't you go back and pay? You can say off as much as you want, but everyone else has to pay. You're carrying a knife, you say? Nearly 1 in 25 people using London's public transport aren't paying for it. So there's 8 officers down there, but 1 minute away, that gate's wide open. It's also just annoying watching so many people break the law and get away with it.
Or at least most of the time.
Right, should we go over here to these guys here? Excuse me, gents.
Hello.
You're on camera, mate. You're bang to rights.
Just step to the side and...
All right, thanks very much, guys. It's the same with bike theft, phone theft, tool theft, shoplifting, drugs in town centres, weird Turkish barber shops. It's all chipping away at society. The state needs to reassert itself and go after lawbreakers.
So, of course, things like theft, petty theft, all these kind of things, these are bad, right? I'm not going to try and defend people who steal. That's not what this channel is for. It's not my position on this. I think it's important to frame this, though, in that what Tories and the right will do is, as Jenrick has done here, frame this as if it's the breaking down of society itself, right? We saw this in the 80s, in the dawn of neoliberalism, the talk of family values. We saw it in the 90s with broken homes and of welfare queens and broken windows policing in the United States, for example. And we saw this kind of narrative shape the politics of the kind of 2000s era as well. And it's important to, instead of frame this as being something that is cultural, that is specific to a certain group of people who do this latently, I think it's worth reframing this as a problem that is downwind of systemic issues, right? This is a representation of a failure of policy, of material conditions, and the breakdown of society itself, rather than society is breaking down because of it, right? It's a symptom and not the cause. Now, it's difficult to try and look at this when people will see that there is one rule for the elites and another rule for everybody else. So whilst there are plenty of right-wingers, especially right-wingers from very privileged backgrounds like Robert Jenrick, who went to private school, who will completely ignore white-collar crime, wage theft, the ways in which the richer people don't pay tax and poorer people pay more as a percentage of their income. Like Rishi Sunak paid a smaller percentage in tax than a nurse did, like a Band 5 nurse. They see that as unfair and a breaking of the social contract. We've seen the breakdown in intergenerational unfairness, as I mentioned before, in there being huge amounts of pension and housing and property provision for the elderly, which we continue to protect, and yet we allow them to block the creation of new housing for younger people, right? This is, of course, symptomatic in terms of culturally, of neoliberalism, of greed being good, and not thinking that there is a society that people should serve. There is no such thing as society. It's a very kind of foundational neoliberal doctrine and individualist, cultural neoliberal ideology taking over society, right? People thinking it's everyone for themselves. Why would you care about the knock-on effects for society when all that matters is what's good for you? Of course, you're more likely to do things such as skip the fare or commit petty theft, especially when grand larceny very rarely gets punished. We don't ever look into tax avoidance and tax evasion in the way that we do the small amount that working people do, or clamping down on IR35s, you know? When you see people in this country who are powerful get away with flouting the rules and only getting a slap on the wrist, multi-million pound fines doled out to water companies who then still get to control the assets where they're allowed to increase our bills continually, why would normal people who do obey the rules feel like they should do that when it's clear that people who are powerful can get away with it? This is why it's a systemic problem, both culturally in terms of neoliberal doctrine and the way in which the economics is unfair, both intergenerationally and between classes too. The Conservatives would specifically want to not frame this as a class issue and try and attack poorer people and see it as a moral failing that they individually are responsible for, that the state needs to crack down on rather than change the conditions for, is so that you don't look at the people at the top who are flouting the rules, the people who got the crony contracts during the pandemic, people like Boris Johnson breaking his own rules. Speaking of people breaking the rules in positions of power, Adam Bienkov of Byline Times pointed out that Bobby J himself, hardly somebody who has been fastidious in keeping to the rules. Let's have a look in some of his highlights, shall we? Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick has accepted that he approved a £1 billion East London housing development unlawfully. And accepted that the housing development was unlawful as well. Robert Jenrick admits deliberately helping Tory donor avoid £45 million tax bill by rushing through housing development. Do you think that's part of the social contract, Robert? Robert Jenrick claimed £100,000 in expenses for a third home. Do you think that obeys the social contract, Bobby? And of course, whilst we're on the subject of lockdown breaking, what about Robert Jenrick himself, who apparently, according to the Mirror, quote-unquote, broke lockdown rules twice by going to his second home? He urged the nation to remain in their own homes and travelled 150 miles to his second home. So there is nobody, right? I hate appealing to hypocrisy because it's a pretty cheap argument, right? But you can't have somebody who's in such a privileged position as an MP, who flouts the rules multiple times, who makes a mockery of the idea that everyone should follow the same set of rules within society, should then be able to lecture people during a cost of living crisis, committing things like petty theft. Again, no amount of me will condone behaviour that is unlawful, such as petty theft, right? But these things don't happen in a vacuum. These things happen during times of societal unease, through times with which the purchasing power of working people goes down. And patient zero for the failure in the purchasing power of working people, patient zero for the cost of living crisis, patient zero for a society where we treat greed as being good and it's everyone for themselves, is the Conservative Party and neoliberal ideology. They are patient zero for all of these problems, bar none. They were the ones who sold off national assets that everybody owns to privateers who are rinsing the public for all they're worth whilst ruining our waterways. It's the Conservatives and neoliberalism that taught people that there was no such thing as society, and trying to pay into a social contract was for fool's game, and that it should be everyone for themselves in a dog-eat-dog world, right? That was what they taught us. They deliberately used the economic method to change the soul, as Margaret Thatcher puts it, to create a society full of individualists. And on top of this, the cost of living crisis is intentionally fomented by their essentially cucking out to corporations and allowing them to skirt the rules that everyone else has to follow, whilst on top of that, instituting reforms into the way in which our labour market functions to depress wages for ordinary people to maximise profits for their donors, right? Using the political process specifically to benefit the few and not the many. And then they seem to be surprised when the many feel like society doesn't work for them. It's a very deliberate deflection tactic to try and blame the people on the ground, to try and blame the little people when they do bad things, when they have no other choice a lot of the time, when affording even basic necessities has become difficult in this country, rather than looking inward at the societal things that can change, to change the material conditions that create societal breakdown. And there are plenty of poor countries, there are plenty of poor societies that don't have this level of societal breakdown. What is incredibly important is that it is relative. It is relative poverty. It is relative deprivation. It is inequality that causes this. If everyone bands together because your whole country or society or community is poor, these things don't happen and you band together to try and make things better. When you can see that on some streets in this country you have council housing where people can barely afford to pay the bills on one end, and on the other end of that road you have multimillionaires living in penthouses, that creates societal discohesion. That creates the fertile ground for antisocial behaviour. That is what causes people to feel like the social contract is unnecessary. That is what people see on a day-to-day basis, is the rich, the elites, the powerful, the corporations, the friends of the government, and in some cases, government ministers and even the Prime Minister himself, not adhering to a social contract for everybody. And they think, well, if they don't have to follow the rules, why should I have to follow the rules? It's as simple as that. It's absolutely as simple as that. And there's a reason why you have far more cohesive societies in the social democracies in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia, why crime is lower, why people feel more connected to their communities, because they don't have this vast and deepening inequality and a breakdown in the social order to benefit the super rich at the expense of everybody else. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.